At exactly 12:03 a.m., the porch light blinked on, and my daughter said, without looking at me, "You don't live here anymore." Her hand rested on the door frame like it belonged to someone else, someone colder. My name wasn't in her mouth, just that sentence, flat, final. She didn't even close the door herself. She just walked away, letting it swing slowly until it tapped shut behind her. The driver looked at me like he didn't want to be involved. His job was just to pick up and drop off. I guess mine was to disappear. The rain had started an hour earlier, light at first, then relentless. It soaked through the terry cloth robe I was still wearing from the shower I took before bed. My slippers were somewhere inside, probably still by the bathroom. I stood on the concrete in bare feet, my skin pulling tight from the cold. 2 suitcases stood at my side, like silent accusations. I didn't recognize them at first. They weren't mine. They were new, probably bought for the occasion. Black, cheap, cold to the touch. I had no idea who packed them. Inside those bags were things I hadn't touched in years. A worn flannel nightgown I stopped wearing after my ex-husband said it made me look unsexed. A Bible I never opened again after I realized prayers didn't stop people from lying. Photos of me cropped. The frame I loved, the pewter one with the mother and child embossed along the edge, was missing, replaced with a plastic rectangle that cracked when I opened it. A note wasn't included. Not a word. Not even a lie. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to give them the moment of relief that would come if I broke. They wanted that. My daughter wanted that. The silence between us had been growing for months, maybe years, and now it had spoken. Its final word was exile. The driver cleared his throat and asked if I had an address. I gave him my sister's name, though we hadn't spoken in 5 years. As we pulled away from the house I'd cleaned every Sunday for 18 years, I turned once, just once, to look back. The kitchen light was still on. A bowl sat on the table. I wondered if it was mine. I wondered if anything in there still remembered me. My hands started to tremble about 15 minutes into the drive, not from cold, not from fear, but from something that hadn't found words yet. It wasn't sadness. That would come later, I think. It was something else, something raw, a silence that wrapped itself around my throat like a fist. I sat up straighter, trying to breathe around it. The driver, bless him, kept his eyes on the road. No small talk, no soft pity. He wasn't the kind to ask, "Are you okay?" He could tell I wasn't. We passed 3 exits, a Waffle House, and a church sign that read, "Trust God, not your feelings." I almost laughed. I didn't go to my sister's. I asked the driver to stop at a 24-hour diner. I needed light. I needed to sit somewhere that didn't echo with betrayal. The waitress poured me coffee without asking. She had bleach blonde hair and eyes that had seen 100 women like me. She didn't ask why I was barefoot, didn't flinch when my voice shook ordering eggs. She just brought them hot and overdone and let me be. I sat there until the rain slowed. My fingers curled around the coffee cup like it might save me. Somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., it occurred to me that no one was coming after me. No apologies, no calls, no screaming fits or desperate attempts to stop me from leaving. That was the part that hollowed me out the most. Not the betrayal, not even the abandonment, but the ease of it, the simple, seamless removal of me from their world. I was not fought for. I was not defended. I was erased. When I finally stood up to leave, my legs ached like I'd run a marathon. The waitress nodded toward the counter and said someone had already paid my bill. She didn't say who. I didn't ask. I walked out into the dim gray morning with a trash bag over my feet and a receipt in my pocket, though I didn't buy anything. The motel I found took cash. I handed over a $100 bill I'd forgotten was in my wallet and watched the clerk slide me a key without looking up. Room 107. The walls smelled like mildew and lemon cleaner. The sheets were stiff. I laid down without turning off the light. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I looked at the ceiling and whispered the sentence back to myself. You don't live here anymore. Like it was a spell, like it was a curse, like it was freedom. It wasn't always like this. That's what I kept telling myself in the early hours when sleep wouldn't come, and the motel fridge hummed like it was keeping secrets. I used to belong somewhere. I used to matter. I wasn't born discarded. That came later, slowly, by choice, though not mine. When I was 23, I married a man who carried his ambition like a badge. Daniel. He smiled like he knew the ending to every story and kissed me like I'd never want to know another. I believed in him the way young women do, fully desperately, with every soft part of myself exposed. He said he'd make a name for himself. I told him I didn't need much. He could have the glory. I just wanted a kitchen of my own, a baby or two, and someone who came home to me like I was enough. We started in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's. The floor creaked and the windows leaked, but it was ours. I worked the front desk at a dental office back then. My feet hurt. My fingers smelled like latex. I came home with ink smudged on my scrubs and never once thought I was wasting anything. Because when he'd stay up late, studying torts and civil codes, I'd sit beside him on the floor with a bowl of pasta and really believe that this was what building a life looked like. Shared sacrifice, mutual hunger, becoming something together. Then the kids came. First Layla, then Jonah. I cut my hours to raise them. Daniel passed the bar and started at a firm downtown. He was gone more always with some client who needed him. I didn't mind not at first. I made school lunches and birthday cakes and flashcards with words like responsibility and integrity. I bought a whiteboard and wrote weekly goals on it. I made everything efficient, color-coded loving. That was how I showed I cared. Not in big speeches, but in tiny, invisible efforts that no one else noticed. I remember once, after Layla had a fever, I sat up all night to keep a cold rag on her head. Daniel had an early deposition, so I told him to sleep in the guest room. Around 3 a.m., she turned to me and mumbled, "I love you even when I'm sick." I cried quietly into the sleeve of my sweatshirt so she wouldn't feel guilty, so she wouldn't know that sentence had healed something I didn't know was broken. When Layla was 9 and Jonah was 6, I found out Daniel had been sleeping with someone at his office. I found the text accidentally. His phone had pinged while he was in the shower, and I saw a message that read, "Last night still lingers." At first, I told myself it was nothing. Then I told myself it was a phase. Then I told myself it was my fault. That's how women like me stay. We blame ourselves so thoroughly that no one else has to. He apologized, of course, bought me flowers, said it was a mistake, a lapse, a meaningless thing. I believed him because I needed to, because the thought of breaking the family scared me more than being humiliated inside it. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't even tell my sister. I decided I'd rather be loyal than right. Years passed. We went to church, sat in pews like nothing had happened. I volunteered at the school bake sale and kept my mouth shut. But things shifted. Not loud, not violent, just enough. He started calling me Han instead of my name. He stopped kissing me goodbye. He began referring to the house as his investment. The children stopped being ours and became my responsibility. I remember scrubbing baseboards at midnight once, just to feel like something was getting cleaned. Then the divorce. Polite, clinical, uncontested. He gave me the house to keep things stable for the kids. That's what he said. What I didn't realize, what no one told me, was that the deed was never actually put in my name. It was placed in a trust controlled by Layla as the primary beneficiary. I didn't know that. Not then. I only knew that when Layla moved back in, after college, heartbroken and soft around the edges, I welcomed her like the child I still remembered. I made her tea, washed her sheets, listened when she cried about her ex's coldness. Never once did I suspect she would come to mirror him. She was different, yes, more guarded, less affectionate, but I chalked it up to grief. A woman recovering from heartbreak doesn't always smile easily. I understood that. I didn't ask questions. And maybe that was the problem, because love, when it goes unexamined, can rot beneath the surface. And mine was rotting, slowly, faithfully, without a sound. It started with the coffee mugs. My favorite one, the chipped blue one with the faded constellation print, went missing. Then another. I opened the cabinet one morning and found it rearranged. Uniform, pristine, unfamiliar mugs lined the shelf like soldiers. Layla always liked things clean, but this felt like erasure. The fridge changed too. My yogurt, the kind with real honey, was gone, replaced with oat milk and imported cheese and things I didn't recognize. At first I laughed, called it yuppie food. She didn't smile, just stared at me and said, "It's healthier." Then she walked out of the room. Dinners grew quiet. She started eating in her room. Sometimes I'd hear the microwave beep and footsteps creak back up the stairs, but the kitchen stayed untouched. One night, I made her favorite rosemary chicken mash sweet potatoes, sautéed spinach. I left a plate out for her, covered in foil. The next morning, it was in the trash, still full. The fork lay across it like an accusation. I didn't say anything. I tried harder instead. I bought fresh flowers and placed them in the foyer. I mopped the floors with lavender oil, like she used to love. I stopped humming when I cleaned, because she once said it made her feel on edge. It didn't work. She stopped calling me Mom, not directly, just quietly. She'd referred to me as her when she talked on the phone. I heard it once from the hallway. Yeah, I'm still living at her place. Her. Like I was a stranger who happened to share the same roof. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and saw her whispering on the phone. When she noticed me, she turned her back and lowered her voice. I waited. She didn't turn around, just kept whispering. When I cleared my throat, she flinched like I'd thrown something. I asked if she was okay. She said I'm fine, with a tightness in her jaw that made my ribs ache. I started to notice more things. She wouldn't sit beside me on the couch anymore. The thermostat was always changed after I adjusted it. I'd set it to 72. She'd lower it to 68. Not once did she mention it. It was just her way of saying, not your house. Mail started arriving in her name. Official-looking envelopes. Legal firms. I didn't open them, of course, but I felt them like a pressure in my chest. Something was moving, something I wasn't invited into. I baked a cake for her birthday, German chocolate, homemade, the same recipe I'd used since she was 8. I even bought the same number of candles she used to love blowing out, even though she hadn't in years. I set it on the table, waited. She didn't come downstairs. I sat there, the cake untouched, until the sun dipped below the trees, and the shadows on the wall stretched long enough to wrap around my throat. I put the cake in the fridge, a quiet surrender. The next morning I found it in the trash. Still whole, still beautiful. The candles unopened, still in their plastic. I opened the trash lid, stared at it, and for a moment I thought, this is what it feels like to bury a part of yourself without a funeral. The silence between us wasn't just passive, it was weaponized. Every withheld word was a scalpel. Every closed door, a judgment. And I kept bleeding in the quiet, convinced it was just a phase, that she was grieving something and I was simply collateral damage. But the truth was harder. She wasn't grieving. She was building a life where I didn't fit. One night, I heard her laugh, really laugh for the first time in weeks. I walked down the hallway, drawn to the sound, like it was a fire in the cold. Her door was cracked. I peeked inside. She was sitting on her bed phone, propped on her lap, FaceTiming someone. Her voice was light, bright, young. Yeah, it's just temporary. I'll have the house soon. She won't be a problem. My stomach turned to stone. I backed away before she saw me, walked into the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub. The mirror was fogged from the shower she'd taken earlier. I stared at my reflection through the blur and realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. My eyes looked older than they should have. My shoulders were rounded. My hands, once always moving, just sat in my lap like they didn't know what to do. I whispered, "What did I do wrong?" to the steam. The mirror didn't answer. I started staying out longer after errands, lingering at grocery stores, taking extra turns on the way home. I found myself parking at the lake and just watching the water ripple. It was the only place that didn't feel hostile. When I came home one evening, the door was locked. Not just the front door, the garage too. I had to knock. I hadn't knocked on my own door in 20 years. Layla opened it, her face blank. No explanation, no apology, just turned and walked away. That night I found my journal, the one I kept hidden under the mattress on my desk. Open, a Post-it note stuck to the first page. You might want to be more careful with what you write. The next day, I stopped writing. The envelope came 3 days later. I found it shoved under my bedroom door, the edge curled, like it had been handled roughly. No return address. My name typed, not handwritten. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Part of me already knew what it would say. There's a weight to certain kinds of betrayal. You can feel it before you read a single word. I peeled it open with trembling fingers, careful not to rip anything, as if gentleness could soften whatever it held. The papers inside were stiff crisp, legal documents, formal language, phrases like notice to vacate non-owner, occupant transfer of deed. My eyes blurred. I sat down on the edge of my bed, knees trembling, and read it again, and again, and again. According to the paperwork, the house had never been mine, not officially. The deed I discovered had been quietly transferred 5 years earlier, right around the time Daniel's estate was restructured. After the divorce, he'd told me I was getting everything, that he didn't want to fight. He used words like clean break and stability for the kids. But while I was keeping the peace, he was moving the pieces. The trust he established had one primary beneficiary, Layla, my daughter, the girl I nursed through croup and heartbreak and late-night fevers, now owned the roof over my head, and she had filed through her lawyer, not through her mouth, for my removal. I felt the breath leave my body in a single sharp pull, like someone had reached into my lungs and taken everything but the scream. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stared at that name, Layla R. Whitman, in block letters at the bottom of the document. Her signature, neat and certain. It was real. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen. She was sitting at the counter eating yogurt and tapping on her phone. I held up the envelope. My hand was shaking. "This yours." She didn't look up. "You read it, didn't you?" "That's not an answer." She sighed, put her spoon down, and finally met my eyes. Her expression was blank. No regret, no fury, just exhaustion maybe. Like I was an overdue task she was checking off. "I need the space. I'm buying the place out from the trust. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal." I repeated like the words had lost all meaning. "Then why didn't you talk to me?" "Why this, I did talk to you. You just didn't listen." "To what?" She stood up, grabbed her phone. "To the fact that I can't live like this anymore. This house isn't a museum. You keep it frozen. Every dish in the same place. Every photo still up like nothing ever changed. So throw out the dishes. Move the photos. I would have helped you, but you never let go." Her voice cracked just a little. "Of him, of the past, of anything." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She didn't wait. She walked out, leaving her yogurt half-eaten. I stood there, envelope in hand, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock above the stove. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. Not to fight. I didn't have the money or the stomach, but to understand. He confirmed it. The trust documents were airtight. Daniel had been meticulous. Legally, Layla had every right to ask me to leave, and she was giving me 30 days. Generous, the lawyer said. Generous. I laughed out loud in his office. It came out like a cough. At home, I packed slowly, methodically. I made lists, labeled boxes, cleaned out drawers. Every item I touched felt like an artifact proof that I had once belonged. A baby sock tucked in the back of my dresser. A crumpled note from Layla, age 10. "You're the best mom in the galaxy." I sat on the floor and stared at it for an hour. The ink had faded, but the words still stung. I considered confronting her again, saying something that might pierce whatever fog she was living in. But I didn't. I knew better than to beg. I had done that once, years ago, with Daniel, pleaded with him not to leave, not to give up on us. All it earned me was silence and the click of a door that never reopened. I wasn't going to do it again. Instead, I waited until the morning sun lit the hallway. I made breakfast, toast eggs, orange slices, the way she liked them. I placed the plate on the table, poured coffee into the mug she used to steal from my cabinet, and set the letter folded once next to the napkin. She didn't come down, so I walked up the stairs, quietly, opened her door without knocking. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling on her phone. I stepped inside, set the breakfast on her nightstand. She looked up startled. "What are you doing?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't let the tears show. "You've already killed your mother," I said. "All that's left is the burial." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I walked out before she could close it again. I left the house 2 days later. No police, no drama, no suitcases thrown into the yard. Just a quiet exit, the kind that doesn't echo until long after the door clicked shut. I packed what I could fit into the trunk of the car I just bought with what little savings I had left. A 2011 Honda Civic with peeling paint and a radio that only played one station. It was mine. That was all I needed. The house looked smaller in the rearview mirror. It used to feel enormous rooms, filled with memory, with love, with noise. Now it was just architecture, walls that no longer held my name. I didn't cry as I drove. Not that morning. My hands were too steady, my spine too straight. Some part of me had calcified, hardened into something less fragile. It wasn't strength, not yet. It was instinct, the same one that helps a wounded animal crawl into the brush, away from eyes, away from the world, to bleed in peace. I found a studio apartment an hour away, the kind of place people rent when they're starting over or waiting for something worse. One room, no oven walls so thin I could hear my neighbor breathe through the vents. But it had a lock that only I had the key to. The first night I sat on the floor, eating crackers and watching the shadows stretch across the wall. No TV, no internet, just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and a silence that didn't hurt. I started keeping a notebook again, not a journal, just words, thoughts that showed up when I was too tired to argue. Sometimes just phrases, I exist, I exist, I exist, or no one can take your name unless you give it to them. One morning, about 2 weeks in, I woke up with sunlight on my face and realized something strange. I hadn't dreamed about them. Not once. Not Layla. Not Daniel. Not the house. My mind, it seemed, was clearing space for something else, something quieter. I got a job working part-time as a receptionist at a law office. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt solid. The woman who hired me was sharp, no nonsense, wore thick glasses, and used the word integrity without irony. She took one look at my resume and said, "You've been through something." I nodded. She didn't ask what. We worked mostly with elder clients, people who had been abandoned, mistreated, forgotten. I watched daughters sue their mothers, sons contest wills. I watched the slow rot of resentment made legal, and I listened, not just to the clients, but to myself. Each story chipped away at the illusion I'd lived inside for decades, that love once given guaranteed anything, that sacrifice earned safety, that loyalty meant you'd be remembered fondly. One afternoon, a man came in, late 40s, expensive shoes, eyes like Layla's ex. He sat in the waiting room filling out forms with impatient pen strokes. When I called his name, he looked up startled. "Rebecca!" I froze. My name sounded foreign in his mouth. "Ryan," I said. My voice was calm, colder than I meant. "You're here to see Miss Haskell." He nodded. "Yeah, didn't expect to see you. People like me end up in strange places." He chuckled awkwardly. "How have you been?" I wanted to say, I was kicked out of my house at midnight by my daughter, and now I rent a studio that smells like paint thinner. But instead I said, "I'm working. I'm well." He looked like he wanted to say something else, an apology maybe, a confession, but I had already turned. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, heart pounding. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would, seeing him, hearing my name in that old voice. It felt like looking at a photograph of someone I used to know, someone I no longer needed. That night, I walked home instead of taking the bus. It was late. The streets were empty. The wind bit through my jacket, but I didn't care. I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to stillness. Not joy, not peace, just the absence of pain. the absence of waiting. When I got home, I stood at the door a moment before unlocking it. The hallway smelled like burnt rice from the neighbor's dinner. A dog barked 2 floors up. I walked in, dropped my keys into the bowl I'd bought at a thrift store, and sat down at my tiny kitchen table. I took out my notebook. Tonight I wrote, "You were not broken. You were betrayed. And that's not the same thing." Then I made myself tea, chamomile. For the first time in a long time, I drank it hot. The phone rang 2 months later. I was slicing an apple at the time, not thinking of anything except how the skin curled in one red ribbon under the blade. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer, but something, curiosity, or some leftover reflex from all the years I spent waiting, made me pick up. Mom, that voice. It hit me like a dull blade, not sharp enough to cut clean, but deep enough to bruise everything beneath it. I didn't respond right away. I held the phone to my ear and waited for her to say something else, something that might explain why she was calling now, after weeks of silence. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said. Her voice sounded brittle, lighter, like she'd lost something she didn't know was keeping her grounded. I stood still in my kitchen, one hand still on the apple, the other holding the phone like it might dissolve. My breath felt heavy in my chest. I stared at the curve of the table I'd scrubbed down with lemon oil just that morning. My apartment was so quiet, I could hear the soft hum of the neighbor's TV through the wall. I thought I'd feel free, she continued. I thought once the house was mine, everything would make sense. Does it? I asked. No, she whispered. It feels hollow. I closed my eyes. The quiet in me stretched so wide, I felt like I could fall into it. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I was angry. I felt like you were holding me back somehow. I wasn't holding you, I said quietly. You just needed someone to blame. There was a long pause. I see that now. I sat down at the table. The apple was starting to brown. I pushed the plate away. I went through your old journals, she said. The ones you kept in the attic. I didn't mean to. I was looking for God. I don't even know what I was looking for, but I read them. I saw the things you didn't say out loud. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence was thick enough to hold all the weight of what couldn't be undone. I didn't know you stayed for me, she said, voice shaking. I thought you were just stuck, bitter, always cleaning, always hovering. I didn't realize it was love. Sometimes I said, love looks a lot like routine. I'm sorry, she said. And this time, it didn't feel like a weapon. It didn't fix anything either. It just hung there. A fragile thing, a beginning or an end I couldn't tell. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I didn't say I forgive you, because that would be a lie. But I also didn't hang up. Instead, I asked, what do you want from me, Layla? There was a pause. Then I don't know. Just your voice. I missed it. And for the first time in a very long time, I let my voice be mine. Not the soft, accommodating one I used to use to keep peace. Not the shaky one that came with betrayal. Just me, steady, tired, whole. I'm not coming back, I said. I know I'm not the person you can fold away when it's inconvenient. I know. And I'm not here to soothe your guilt. She sniffled. Okay. There was silence again. Will you ever forgive me? She asked, small, as a child. I don't know, I said. But I'm not holding hate, if that's what you're afraid of. I'm not afraid, she whispered. But I think she was. We said goodbye, like people who didn't know if they would speak again. Like two women standing on opposite cliffs, unsure if the bridge between them was safe to cross. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood up, washed the knife, and threw away the apple. Outside, the city moved around me. Sirens, laughter, a dog barking 2 floors up. Inside, I felt something shift. Not a closing, not a reopening, just a room I could finally walk out of. 3 weeks passed before I heard from her again. This time, it was a letter, handwritten, no return address. My name spelled in a script I hadn't seen since she was in high school, back when she used to sign birthday cards with hearts instead of periods. It arrived folded in half inside a plain envelope, no embellishments, no stickers, no perfume, just ink on paper, honest, almost naked. I stared at it for hours before opening it. I left it on the kitchen counter while I swept the floor, while I folded laundry that barely filled one basket, while I made tea I didn't drink. I circled it like it was something wild, something that might bite if I got too close. When I finally opened it, my hands were dry. My heartbeat was steady. She wrote, "Mom, I don't know how to make this right. I don't even know if I should try. I've been waking up in that house, and it feels colder now, not just in temperature, in memory. You were the heat in the walls, and I didn't see it until the room started echoing. I'm not writing this to ask you to forgive me. I think I've forfeited that. I just needed you to know I remember now, all of it. The soup you used to make when I was sick. The time you stayed up with me the night before finals just to quiz me, even though you had work at 6. The way you smiled through everything, even when I know now you were exhausted. I thought you were clinging to me. I didn't see that you were holding me. There's a difference. I hope you're okay. I hope someone looks at you and sees what I forgot to. I miss you. Layla." I folded the letter back along its crease, slid it into my desk drawer, and didn't read it again for a long time. I didn't respond either. Because love, real love, is not quick to repair. It doesn't snap back like a rubber band. It mends slowly, quietly, with time and choice. I carried her letter with me for a while, not in my purse, not out of sentimentality, but because I needed the reminder that she was human too, capable of reflection, of regret. It didn't mean she hadn't hurt me. It didn't undo the ache of being cast out like clutter, but it softened something at the edge of me. I started spending weekends at the library, not reading, not really, just being there, among shelves and spines and stories, lives that had nothing to do with mine. I found comfort in fiction, in the truth that people had survived worse and still found something worth saying. One afternoon, an older woman sat next to me in the reading room. She wore red lipstick like armor and had fingernails the color of cherries. She looked over at me and said, "You've got a quiet sadness to you." I blinked. Sorry, it's not a bad thing," she said. "Just means you've been paying attention." We sat in silence after that, and somehow I felt less alone. That night, I dreamed I was back in the house, but it was empty. Not just of people, of everything. No furniture, no color, just bare walls and echoes. In the dream, I walked from room to room, calling out for Layla, for Jonah, even for Daniel. No one answered. The silence was deafening. When I woke up, there were tears on my pillow. But they didn't feel like mourning. They felt like release. Grief isn't just about death. It's about change, about realizing someone you love is no longer capable of being who you believed they were. And maybe you're not either. I stopped wearing my wedding ring that week. I'd kept it on even after the divorce, out of habit, out of denial. I slid it off in the middle of folding socks and just never put it back on. My finger felt strange without it, lighter, a little naked, but clean. Some nights I still stood at the window and watched the streetlights flicker. Still wondered if Layla was okay, if she missed me the way she said she did. But I didn't call, not out of pride, out of self-respect. For the first time in years, I was learning how to be alone without being lonely. There's a difference. I started planting herbs on the windowsill, basil, mint, thyme. The mint grew fast, unruly, reaching toward the sun, like it had something to prove. I liked it. I liked the way it refused to be tamed. One morning, I cut a few leaves and steeped them in hot water. The scent filled my little kitchen. I sat at my table, cupped the warm mug in my hands, and let myself smile, not because everything was better, but because some small, essential part of me was coming back to life. The season shifted before I noticed. I had been marking time by silence, by stillness, by how often I no longer thought of her face. But one morning, I woke up and the air had turned a crispness in the light, that soft slant of autumn creeping across the window pane. I reached for a sweater without thinking, the one I used to wear when I'd walk Jonah to the bus stop. He'd hold my hand until the very last moment, even when the other boys teased him for it. I folded the sleeves over my hands and stood by the window, watching the world breathe in cooler air. My phone vibrated once. A message from a number I didn't have saved anymore, but still knew by heart. I'm driving out your way today. Can I stop by just for a minute? I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. I'd spent all of that already. I just didn't know what I wanted from her, or what she wanted from me. She showed up anyway. 3 hours later, I heard a knock. 2 short raps and then 1 long. The same rhythm she used when she was a little girl playing hide and seek. I didn't open the door right away. I looked through through the peephole first. Her face was older than I remembered, gaunt in the cheeks, sleepless under the eyes. But she looked like my daughter again. Not the stranger who packed my life into 2 suitcases. Just a woman who'd built something ugly and now didn't know how to tear it down. When I opened the door, she held nothing in her hands. No flowers, no apology baked into a pie. Just herself. I don't want to come in, she said. I needed to see you. Make sure you're real. I stepped aside without saying a word. She didn't move. I've been going to therapy, she said. I've been talking about you, about everything. Still, I didn't speak. I thought getting the house meant I was claiming something. Power, maybe. Control. But now, it's just full of ghosts. Everything creaks louder without you there. I looked at her face and saw traces of the girl I once held against my chest after night terrors. The girl who used to braid my hair while I folded laundry. The girl who clung to me when she had her first heartbreak and whispered, "Don't ever leave me." And I thought, you left me first, but I didn't say it. Instead, I nodded once, quiet, measured. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. Small, old. I recognized it instantly. Jonah was 4, Layla 7. They were in the backyard, covered in soap bubbles, grinning like they'd never felt shame. My arms were around them, both eyes half closed in mid-laugh. I remembered the moment the camera clicked. I remembered how hot the pavement was under our feet, how sticky the popsicles had been, how safe everything had felt. I found it tucked behind the bookshelf, she said. I don't even remember putting it there. I took it with careful hands. The edges were worn, one corner slightly torn. I'm sorry, she said, eyes shimmering, not just for what I did, but for what I couldn't see. I studied the photo a long time. The joy in it, the innocence, the woman I used to be. I held the picture to my chest and said, I'm not the same. I know. I can't come back. I'm not asking you to. We stood like that, with the wind rising between us. A single dry leaf scraped across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a child screamed, not in fear, but in play, that old unfiltered sound of life moving forward. I just want to know if there's a door, she said, someday, if you'd let me knock again. I looked at her, really looked, and for once, I didn't feel like a mother failing. I felt like a woman who had been buried and had clawed her way back to air. Maybe I said, someday, but I'm not building the path for you. She nodded. That's fair. We stood in silence for a beat longer. Then she turned and walked away, her steps slow, unsure. She didn't look back. I didn't invite her to. That night, I pinned the photo to the wall above my small desk, not because I missed that version of us, but because I needed to honor the fact that I existed there. I loved deeply. I tried harder than most would. I stayed until I had nothing left to prove. Later, I lit a candle and let the wax drip until it cooled into strange shapes. I wrote a letter not to her, but to myself. I didn't plan to send it, just needed to say the words out loud in ink. You were not weak. You were never too much. You loved without return, and still you rose. That is your story. That is your power. Don't ever forget it. I folded it once, slid it into my drawer. Then I went to bed, and for the first time since the night she told me I didn't live there anymore, I slept through until morning. Weeks passed, and the quiet settled into me like a familiar blanket. I no longer measured time by absence. My days were no longer framed by what I wasn't receiving calls, apologies, answers, but by the rhythm of my own small life. Wake, stretch, tea, work, read, sleep. I started noticing things again. How the light shifted through the window around 4 p.m, warming the farthest corner of the room. How the basil plant leaned toward the sun like it had a dream. How my hands, once only moving in service to others, now moved for me. One Sunday I took a walk through the neighborhood, not with purpose, just to move. I passed a young couple arguing on their porch, a boy riding his bike with shoelaces, untied, a woman crying quietly into her sleeve near a mailbox. The world was loud with grief and grace both. I didn't feel above it. I felt inside it. Finally. I turned the corner and saw a bookstore I hadn't noticed before, used cluttered with hand-lettered signs in the window. I stepped in without hesitation. The bell above the door rang with a broken chime. Inside it smelled like dust and ink and forgotten dreams. There were books stacked on the floor, in chairs, along window ledges. No system, no genre separation, just spines leaning into one another the way people do when they've survived storms. An older man behind the counter looked up and nodded once. No words, no sales pitch. I wandered for nearly an hour, let my hands trail the stories. I picked up a worn copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves. I'd seen it on Layla's nightstand once years ago. She never finished it, said it was too folkloric. I bought it, paid in cash. The man handed me a bookmark with a feather pressed into the lamination. I don't know why, but it made me want to cry. Back home, I read a few pages and underlined one line. If you have ever been pushed out, it was because you were meant to push in somewhere else. That night, I dreamed of a house I'd never lived in before, small but glowing, every wall painted in soft colors, windows thrown open, wind moving through sheer curtains. I was baking something. There was music playing. No one else was there, and I wasn't waiting. In the mornings, I started a new ritual. Just 10 minutes. I would sit with my notebook and write whatever came to mind. Some days it was anger, other days longing, but most often it was nothing but presence. Words like, I am here, still worth the warmth of the sun. At the law office, Ms. Haskell asked if I wanted more hours. I said yes, not because I needed the money, though I did, but because it felt good to be trusted, to be seen as capable again. One afternoon, we had a client come in, a woman in her 70s, face lined like tree bark, eyes still sharp. She said, my son tried to take the house, said I was unfit to manage it. Ms. Haskell asked the usual questions, legal things, numbers, documents. But the woman looked at me when she said he was my baby, my sweet boy, and now I don't even know his voice when he calls. I felt something crack in me, not from pain, from recognition. I touched her hand gently and said, you still know your own. That's enough. She cried then, not loudly, just enough to be human. After she left, Ms. Haskell pulled me aside and said, you ever think about going back to school? You've got a steadiness. Could be good in social work. I laughed, not cruelly, just softly. Maybe someday. But later that night, I opened my laptop and searched for local programs, not to enroll, just to see, just to remind myself that the future wasn't a closed road. One of the links had a photo of women sitting in a circle, notebooks in their laps, one of them speaking, the others listening. The caption read, start where you are. I closed the screen, but that phrase stayed with me. Start where you are. Not where you wish you were. Not where someone left you. Here, now. I lit a candle that evening, lavender and cedar. The scent filled the apartment. I turned off every overhead light and let the flame flick shadows on the walls. I sat in that light and read until the words blurred. When I finally stood up, I walked past the mirror and caught my reflection. I paused. I didn't look radiant. I didn't look young. But I looked like a woman who had finally come back to herself. No one handed me an apology tied in ribbon. No redemption arc came to my door. No daughter clutched my knees in repentance. No man regretted losing me. But I was standing, breathing, holding my own name in my own mouth. That was enough. Winter came in quietly, without fanfare. One morning, I woke to frost on the windows and the sound of wind tugging at the loose screen outside. My breath fogged in front of me as I made tea. The heater groaned to life like it had something to prove. There was no Christmas tree in the corner this year. No garland. No wreath. I didn't even hang the ornaments I used to keep in a box marked fragile in Layla's handwriting. They were still in the back of my closet, untouched. Some part of me wanted to leave them there, like fossils from another life. But I did put up lights, tiny ones, white and warm, strung along the top of the window, like hope, stretched thin, but still glowing. It wasn't much, but it was mine. People at the law office started calling me Becca instead of Miss Whitman. The name sat differently on me now, lighter, like something I'd grown into rather than inherited. I liked the way Ms. Haskell said it, firm but kind. like I belonged. One afternoon, she brought me a scarf, soft gray wool, and said, "You looked cold the other day." I tried not to cry in front of her, just nodded and said, "Thanks." But when I got home, I wrapped it around my neck and stood in front of the mirror whispering, "You are not invisible." I kept repeating it, not like an affirmation, but like a vow. Then sometime around the new year, a letter came in the mail. Not from Layla, from Jonah. The handwriting was loose slanted, the way it always was, like his thoughts couldn't wait for his pen to catch up. "Mom, I know I haven't said much since everything happened." I didn't know what to say. Layla told me what she did. I told her she was cruel. I don't care if that makes me a bad brother. What she did wasn't just wrong, it was cowardly. I tried to find you, but no one would give me an address. I hope this gets to you. I hope you're okay. I just wanted to say, I love you. Always have. Always will. And you didn't deserve any of it. Call me if you want. Or don't. I'll wait. Jay. There was a number at the bottom. His handwriting had gotten messier at the end. I held the letter for a long time. My heart didn't race. It didn't twist or ache. It just settled into a quiet thrum, like a familiar rhythm, returning after a long silence. I didn't call right away. I put the letter in my drawer with Layla's in my own, a small archive of what had been broken and what was trying, tentatively, haltingly, to be mended. The next morning, I called in sick, not because I was ill, but because the air was clear and I wanted to walk. I bundled in the gray scarf, pulled my coat tight, and wandered through the neighborhood. The sky was pale blue, empty. The wind bit, but not cruelly. I walked past the lake, now half frozen, and sat on a bench, dusted with frost. My breath came out in clouds. A child walked by, holding a woman's hand, mother or grandmother, I couldn't tell. The woman leaned down and said something, and the child laughed, pure and loud. I watched them disappear around the bend and felt something strange rise up in my throat. Not envy, not sadness, just memory and gratitude. I whispered thank you to no one in particular, to the wind maybe, or the sky, or myself. Thank you for not letting me disappear. Thank you for giving me a spine, not just a heart. Thank you for showing me I can live without being chosen, because I can. I made my way back home slowly, each step steady. No rush, no destination, but warmth and stillness. That night I made soup from scratch just for me. I set the table, lit a candle, played old music I used to hum while cleaning. I even poured myself a glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to mark something, the reclaiming of ordinary things. After dinner, I wrote Jonah back, just a few lines. "Dear Jay, I'm okay. That's all I have in me to say tonight. But yes, I love you too." Mom. I put the letter in the envelope, sealed it with my thumb, pressed firm along the crease. Then I sat by the window and watched the street below. And for the first time since the night, I was told I didn't live there anymore. I didn't feel exiled. I felt released. February passed like a sigh. Soft, cold, forgettable. The kind of month that slips between your fingers if you're not paying attention. I didn't mark Valentine's Day. No cards came, no flowers. But I didn't mind. I'd stopped waiting for gestures that once felt like proof I mattered. Instead, I began to collect something else, hours of my own choosing. I took the long route to work. I ate breakfast by the window, not over the sink. I started learning names at the coffee shop on the corner, Daniela, who made the best cappuccinos, and Jamal, who always played jazz when it rained. I started nodding to strangers like we shared a secret survival. I saw a therapist once, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't mistaking numbness for healing. Her office smelled like eucalyptus and dry books. She wore thick sweaters and listened more than she spoke. The first thing she asked me was, "Who are you without them?" I didn't have an answer, not then, but I kept going, and over time, I began to unearth fragments. I liked lemon tea and stormy weather. I hated loud clocks and artificial vanilla. I found peace in folding warm laundry and discomfort in compliments I didn't believe. I wasn't anyone's mother, anyone's ex, anyone's burden. I was just Becca. One Thursday afternoon, I saw Layla again. I was walking through the open-air market, hands stuffed in my coat pockets, when I heard my name, hesitant, low. She was standing by the apple vendor, wrapped in a green scarf I'd given her when she was 16. I remembered the day I bought it. She'd won her school's writing contest, and I wanted to mark the occasion. She held a bag of oranges in her arms, like a shield. "Hi," she said. I stopped, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know which version of myself would answer. "Hi," I said. She stepped closer, slow, like I might bolt. "I've been thinking about you." I nodded. I figured. I've written more letters. Didn't send them. Why not? I didn't know if I had the right. We stood there as people moved past us, bundled in coats, clutching bags, living their own quiet lives. "You don't need permission to speak," I said, "but you do need to accept that I don't owe you listening." She nodded. "I do. I understand that now." There was a pause. Then I sold the house. I blinked. "You what?" I sold it. Bought a small condo on the other side of town. Too many memories in the old place. Too much weight. I didn't know what to say. The house had been her weapon, her prize, her statement, and now she was letting it go. "It's not an apology," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to erase what I did. I just needed to step out of its shadow." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I've been doing some advocacy work with women's shelters. I didn't realize how many stories sounded like yours, like mine." I met her gaze. It was steadier now, worn down in the right ways. "I'm glad I said, and I meant it. Would you," she started then hesitated, "would you want to meet for coffee sometime? Just coffee. Just two women who are trying, not fixing, not restoring, just trying." I considered it. I pictured us sitting across from each other in some cafe cups between us like a ceasefire. Maybe I said, "Not now." But maybe. She didn't look hurt. She looked relieved. That's enough. We stood in silence. Then I turned slowly and walked away. I didn't look back. Not out of anger. Out of peace. That night, I sat by the window with my tea. The lights outside flickered yellow and soft. The heater clicked on with its usual groan. I wrapped myself in a blanket and opened my journal, and I wrote I didn't go back. But I didn't stay bitter. I let the scar form. And when I touched it, it didn't sting. It just reminded me I survived. I made something from the wreckage. Me. I closed the book. Let the silence take me. And for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next betrayal. I was simply living. Spring came like an apology. Not grand, not theatrical, just quiet warmth creeping through the corners of my window, the soft insistence of life returning. Trees began to bud again. Strangers on the street walked slower, their jackets open, their hands bare. I opened my window for the first time in months and let the air move through the room like breath after grief. I'd been living in the apartment for almost a year. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for routines that no longer belonged to me, laying out 2 plates for dinner, checking my phone for texts that weren't coming, glancing at the front door whenever the wind knocked against it. But those were echoes, not cravings, old instincts fading in volume. One afternoon, while organizing files at the office, I stumbled across a document from an old client, a power of attorney form. Something about the way her daughter had signed it, with exaggerated loops and a faint heart above the "I made my hands still." It was too familiar, too close to home. Later that evening, I found myself walking into a community workshop at the public library. The flyer had said, "Women Reclaiming Voice," in small, hopeful font. I didn't plan to speak. I just wanted to listen. But when the room fell into that soft hush, the one where vulnerability settles like dust, I did speak. I told the story, not all of it, but enough, how I loved, how I was betrayed, how I was made to leave the house I once made a home. I said her name out loud once. I didn't weep. I didn't tremble. I just told the truth. Afterward, a woman in her 60s with silver curls reached for my hand and said, "They always think we'll fall apart, but we don't. We molt." I smiled at that. I liked the word. Molt, not break, not disappear, just shed, just begin again. That night I called Jonah. He picked up after the second ring. "Mom." His voice held warmth, not pity, not hesitation, just that old easy love I used to mistake for a dream. We talked for an hour, about nothing, about everything. He asked what I was reading. I asked about his new job. He said he was coming to visit. I didn't ask when. I just said, "I'll make tea." Then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I opened the back of my closet, pulled out the old ornament box, unwrapped the little hand-painted bird Layla made in 3rd grade. Its wing was chipped, its eye faded, but it still shimmered under the light. I hung it in the window, not to remember what was lost, but to honor what survived, because the woman I am now doesn't shrink to fit old rooms. She builds new ones. She carries her own key and her own name. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.